I'm Gerald Bentley. We are on the Fired Up Network and Wrestling Spotlight. This is Wrestling with Sales, and today we have a special guest. I was looking to talk about the landscape of professional wrestling as we go into the new year, and thought who better to talk about the women's wrestling landscape than TK Trinidad herself. You've seen her doing multiple pro wrestling podcasts, social media influencer herself. And TK, we really are happy to have you on here. I've been waiting for a little bit of time to get you on to get your opinions on women's wrestling.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well. Now, I know you cover wrestling in general, but I was thinking just to start off, we've had a chance to talk with quite a few of the up-and-coming women's professional wrestlers. We just had Jade Cargill on recently. She's your new MLW featherweight champion. Talked to Ruthie J, the 5-star athlete from the NWA, who's again still in that championship mix. How do you feel about women's wrestling in general as we're heading into a new year? It really seems to be on a huge upswing.
Yeah, it's a really great position that we're in right now. When we first started Women's Wrestling Talk, then Women's Wrestling Weekly, back in 2017, it was just primarily an interview show, and I was really kind of, I wouldn't say afraid, but I'm like, oh, are we going to interview all the women that's out there, and we won't have any more women to interview in the next 2 or 3 years? And, right before the pandemic and going into the pandemic and after the pandemic, it seems like there's been a boom as far as wrestling schools, as far as the pathway. You see a lot of people, a lot of women had said at one point they were inspired by Total Divas. But with Total Divas, when it was coming out, the wrestling schools weren't as popular. And now, instead of having 1 or 2 girls in a class, you're getting more girls in the class, and you get a whole bunch of different people just talking about wrestling and being inspired by it. And then you have this boom of wrestlers. And, now they have this pipeline. There's 2 different pipelines that are going on. You have the ones that are coming out of the independent wrestling scene. And then you also have the pipeline that WWE is creating as far as the student athletes.
Yeah, the NIL program.
Yeah. And that's a huge program, because being a former student athlete as well, after it's it's a catch-22, because you put yes, you are a student. If you're a good student, it's even better, because then if you're a good student, you don't really have to concentrate too much on the studies. You're really putting everything you have into sports, but you're not getting any benefit from it, and after the 4 years, that's it. So with this pipeline program, it really extends. They're really getting athletes at their peak, after university. So yeah, there's a huge boom, from like 5 years ago, especially with indies athletes and stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to what the next 5 years is going to look like.
As a dealer, you spend a lot of time buying cars at auction. If you're using Edge Pipeline to manage your purchases, then this is big news. MontWay Auto Transport has partnered with Auction Edge to add a transportation option onto Edge Pipeline. Now dealers can manage their auction buys and book transportation with just one click right in the Edge Pipeline platform. As a nationwide leader in auto transport, MontWay understands a dealer's need for speed and efficiency and can arrange single or multi-vehicle moves from auction to any lot in the country. With MontWay's technology, dealers can gain full transit visibility and tracking after an order has been booked, making it much easier to manage inventory. Buy, ship, and track all in Edge Pipeline. Go to www.montway.com/WS to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just more avenues too, because what I've noticed is, not that long ago, I mean, heck, when you and I were probably really into pro wrestling initially, it was just the WWE and then Ring of Honor to a much smaller degree. And that was it.
Yeah.
And now you have all of these companies are actively touring the United States. And I need to update the graphic because now Impact becomes TNA again. New Japan going to be in the US. They have a big show coming to San Jose, and there's just so many more opportunities. And I think that is very true, that the independent scene is now feeding in and that WWE program, because we've both talked with quite a few women's wrestlers who were the only woman in their school when they were going. I know I had a chance to talk with Rochelle Riveter out
Oh
of
yeah.
Las Vegas, the MOM, and
Mm-hmm.
she told me she had to travel sometimes 300-400 miles just to go against another woman. And now you see multiple women's wrestlers in independent promotions across the country. A bunch of them that we feature here on Wrestling Spotlight. Sky Blue, who has
Mm-hmm.
had a big breakout year in AEW, she's coming back to wrestle for Chicago Style. And I think that's even going to feed it more, because now you see that opportunity and it's right out there in front of people.
Yeah, it's a great I mean, you can look at Roxanne Perez, with Booker T's school, and she's
Yeah.
going back there. It's there's just a lot of and another thing too that I've noticed a lot of wrestlers saying WWE and AEW is not the end all be all. There's wrestlers now who are making, I mean, Matt Cardona, you're making
Mhm.
their money just off of the indies. They get to pick their schedule, they can kind of do what they want, and they can legitimately just do that. And I think doing that with doing the right social media, puts you in that right position as well. So, it's a different era, because, you have wrestlers who they have their shoot job, then they do the wrestling, and that's, a choice. But also you have wrestlers who they've been doing the indies, and that's their title. They're a wrestler. So,
Yeah.
there's more wrestlers doing that nowadays as well.
Yeah. And that they can actually make it. And that is their full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
Another lady that I've been able to follow by working with Las Vegas Wrestling, she's hitting, I don't know if the picture will come up, Viva Van.
Yeah.
She's the champion of Future Stars of Wrestling. She's going to be part of that New Japan Wrestling Battle of the Valley
Mm-hmm.
coming up. And she also has been part of different pro wrestling companies starting up in Asia. She was part of the pro wrestling show at Vietnam that
Mm-hmm.
Chris Jericho went and helped out with. So there's so many more opportunities. It's really amazing. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is you kind of created your own opportunity. You had mentioned it, your women's wrestling podcast. What got you into covering pro wrestling and got you involved in it?
Wow. I'll give you like the short version. So I've been in television for quite some time. And I started out in Toronto, so originally from Toronto, Canada. I
Okay.
was working at a TV station called Rogers TV. And at
Hmm.
the time, we had a wrestler camp come in. His name was Austin Creed at the time. And we became friends. That station I was working at, they actually had a lot more older folks. So like, I think he saw like another younger person, and it's just like, all right, cool. So we've been friends for a long time. I ended up moving to Los Angeles a few years later, and had no idea. We were friends and still talking, but I wasn't following his career. So I had no idea that he signed to WWE. And so when he came to LA, he's like, "Oh, you're in LA, right?" I was like, "Yeah." So we hung out, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm with WWE now. You should come and see." That was my first WWE show, and I was just like, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing."
Okay.
So then I started watching it to support like my friend, and at the time as well as working at TMZ and AfterBuzz TV. And probably about 3 or 4 months after I saw Xavier at WWE, Sean X-Pot needed a co-host because Christy St. Cloud just moved over to WWE. So when I was at AfterBuzz, I had mentioned like, oh yeah, I watch wrestling and stuff like that. And so I kind of slid into that slot, learned it was kind of I watched wrestling a little bit when I was younger with my dad, but
Hmm.
I was really heavily into sports. So being a co-host with X-Pot definitely had to be on my toes. And it was just kind of that almost like a wrestling university, because he would, come with so many stories, and he'd bring all these guests on. And
Sure.
one of the things that I noticed was that, at the time, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 female guests. And I realized there were a lot of other female wrestlers. And so that's how Women's Wrestling Talk was created. So then we just primarily just interviewed female wrestlers, and it's been it's so amazing to see the evolution of life, from people like Chelsea Green, who's, went from Impact to WWE and then went back on the indies and back and just has a strong, like just doing amazing things at WWE, and, just talking to different wrestlers beyond the wrestling of it and just seeing how their careers have been going. So yeah, we've been doing that since 2017.
Awesome. And now, what's your take on? We'll get into the majors. What's your take on what's going on right now in, say, WWE, and then we'll hit the other big two, the AEW and TNA.
I feel like WWE, it was already a major company before the TKO, I want to say partnership, but that's not quite what it was, but kind of falling under the TKO Endeavor brand.
Yeah, kind of like
But
co-branding.
yeah, but now it's just kind of like, think you have this beautiful car and it has everything, right? And then you get this person who's like a super car fan, and they put more stuff on it to make the car faster and prettier and all this other stuff. I feel like that's where WWE is right now. They just, their marketing's always been great, but the level, even with their social media and even how they are bringing, people from NXT to the main roster, and then people even from, the PC Center to NXT. At one point, I'm sure you remember maybe 5 years ago, it's like when somebody was brought to the main roster, it's like they don't have the same name anymore.
Yeah.
You totally forget about all the stuff they've done, and now they're really incorporating who they were at NXT, and even to the point of who they were on the indie scene sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really nice to see. So I feel like it's a very hybrid, not a hybrid, it's very great combination of WWE old school and where it is now. It's not where it's like, WWE or bust. We don't acknowledge anything else beyond us. They're kind of
Sure.
allowing for a little bit of a life outside WWE. So it's a really, I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with all the characters. Obviously, if you have a favorite wrestler and they're not necessarily getting the push, it'll be like, oh, I want this person to get more of a push. But who said it? Soraya said it the best. You can't please everybody. I interviewed her and I asked her something, and she's like, you can't please everybody with, the whole roster and everybody who is a wrestling fan. And once she said that kind of really clicked, because it's like, yeah, you want certain tag teams or whatever to happen, but there's a bigger picture than your feelings, if that makes sense. So I'm really, I'm really excited to see. There's going to be there's a lot of great storylines happening with R-Truth and Judgment Day. And that was hilarious. The Rock coming back, I feel everybody wanted him to come back for Hollywood because it just made sense. He did a couple of breadcrumbs in Denver, and then all of a sudden, he wants to be at the head of the table. It's like, but bro, do you have time? So it's just like a lot of really great things happening with WWE, and especially the women as well. It's really in a great place. If you look back, 10, 15 years, what the women were doing, we have a rewatch show for Total Divas, and if you look at that, how their segments would get cut and stuff like that. So now, where they're main eventing, it's insane. It's a really great place.
Yeah, they can almost run shows with, they have enough women on the roster, they could run a whole show. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now is what wrestling fans wanted to see when Triple H would be in charge, is pulling over that attitude from the black and gold NXT, when NXT was the alternative to the WWE. And like you said, people would come up from NXT and it was like the WWE wanted them to fail. Whereas now it's all working together and they got that whole machine moving in the one direction. So it is a night and day difference versus a few years ago.
Yeah, I kind of almost picture that. It'd be a very big war room, but you have like a war room with each wrestler. And, you have, obviously, barring injuries and all the things, and sometimes things get hot without even it being planned, but they have like a war room with each wrestler and have a trajectory. Like, I'm sure they had that for Bianca. Like, Bianca, I remember seeing her at the PC before she even debuted at NXT, and like kind of the moves that she's made is just definitely, it seems like these are the pinpoints, like these are what we want to hit and this is where we're going to go. So I feel like they're applying that to not just the wrestlers they think are going to be like, the top tier, but, all the other wrestlers as well.
Well, just to hit one of the stories that's kind of percolating on the wrestling media, do you see Trinity coming back? Is Naomi going to make a return to the WWE?
I mean, I think we all want to see her back at WWE. It's a good and bad thing. It's because it's like what you want to see versus what's gonna make Trinity happy. And I remember when she debuted at Impact, it was just seeing her face and just seeing like the joy on her face. If you watch her in WWE, not to say she was miserable, I don't want to speak for her, but she wasn't getting a lot of opportunities for somebody who's been there for a tenure. So, seeing she's getting those opportunities at Impact and seeing that they're treating her like she should be treated is a great thing to see. So now would you leave somewhere that is treating you right to go somewhere where there's a 50-50? So it really just depends on the conversation between her and Triple H and creative and what that would look like. I've personally been pushing for her to be part of the Samoan Dynasty, aka the Bloodline.
Sure, the Bloodline.
Or I don't know, before the Bloodline was even a thing at WWE. And I know that some people are not necessarily for that idea because she's not part of the family, but whatever. I think there'll be right. But it's just kind of like, I think there'd be a really great story there. There's a lot of different things that you can play. So it really just depends. I think it really would just depend on if she gets creative control. And I mean, obviously money's always a thing, but is it really a thing if you're not going to be happy? So it really depends on that conversation and, the creative control. If she comes back to WWE and then she's still slotted in the same place she was when she left, then it just seems like it's all for naught. Because we saw her for the tag teams, and then there was like some ebbs and flows. We'd see her disappear, then come back again, disappear, and then come back again. And sometimes it wasn't even due to injury. It's just because they didn't have a story for her. Mm-hmm. I think at this point, if they want her to come back, it would be on her terms. And if that's the case, we're going to see some great things happen.
Well, and I think it is something where she did go out and really established herself on her own terms, because her and Sasha Banks, they legitimately took the tag team titles and said, here, take them, we're out of here. She went over to Impact, became a champion. Her partner now, Mercedes Monae, also in the news. I mean, time turns, but the same people come back. Supposedly on the verge of signing with AEW, joining that now loaded AEW women's roster. How do you feel about Mercedes Monae making her reappearance in the U.S.?
I don't. The speculations and all that stuff is kind of one of those things where, again, it's. I think both Trin and Mercedes can write their own ticket to wherever they want to go. There. So if you remember when they left the WWE for a year straight, there was a story about them almost every single week, if not every single day. And mind you, they both haven't said their piece as far as what happened in its entirety. Mercedes, I don't think Mercedes had said anything too much. I know Trin had said certain things, but nothing, so we don't necessarily know from their side what happened. So for a year straight, there's all these speculations, whether like what happened. And, essentially a lot of people are dragging their names through the mud. And so at this point, to go through that year and to come out of it and still be talked about, as far as now, people want them at different companies and or back at WWE, which means that they have star power. And I think, those who are the folks who were fans of them knew that they were stars before they left. So again, it goes the same thing for Mercedes. Like, she's in this position where she can write her own ticket. And if she does go to AEW, I think, again, don't know her personally. I think it's under the guise of she has creative control as far as storyline, and she can yay or nay something or all that stuff. Because sometimes with some stuff with AEW, the storylines are not that great.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we also have to take that with a grain of salt because it's only 5 years old. So it's not going to get it's not going to be that operating on full cylinders as we like. Although sometimes I feel like Tony Khan does things just to make people lose their minds on Twitter. So maybe he is a crazy genius, and we'll find out eventually.
Well, to be fair, the WWE does have a 60-year head start on them. And I think they are growing into it. Now, part of the stories about Mercedes Moné coming to AEW is that her arrival would be joined by a new emphasis on women's wrestling, and that you'd see multiple matches, maybe bring Athena back over from Ring of Honor, get her more of a presence, and you start seeing 2 or 3 women's matches a week. Maybe Rampage slides up to be a more heavily women's show, which, right now it's still in that AEW formula that's come to be, right? There's 1 women's match, 3 men's matches, and there you go. So that would be interesting if they add it up, because here's the roster. I mean, the roster's definitely packed enough to have a lot of matches on an every week basis.
Yeah, I think it's like 30 to 80 or 25 to 80, like 25 to 30 women to 80 guys on the current roster. Last time I checked a couple months ago. So yeah, there's more than enough stories. It just, Tony Khan, from what I understand, he takes part in like really crafting those stories. So there's a lot of things that can happen. Again, I feel like if I were Mercedes, because so many people want me, I would definitely kind of take a step back and see what, if you were to be a part of this company, what would that look like, and how much staying power do you have? Because just because there'll be more women's stories as she comes, would the stories be great stories? Would it be, even when, for instance, Saraya and her dropping the belt, I still don't understand the reasoning behind it. And I feel like that could have, and even though Athena's doing amazing at ROH, the fact is there's a lot of people who are not paying the $9.99 on ROH because it's not even like they don't necessarily like the wrestling part of it. But if you have your Hulu, your Netflix, your Prime, and then you're paying for Peacock, and then you're also paying for the AEW pay-per-views, the extra $9.99, although it might not seem like a lot, it's just kind of like you're going to pick and choose. So a lot of people are not really getting to see Athena on a weekly basis. So it's just kind of one of those things, like it really just depends on what Mercedes wants, and if they're going to give it to her, and if that's going to make her happy. Because being with the company, being with WWE and going back to that WWE schedule might not be what she wants. She might want to do more indie stuff. She might want to travel more. She might want to do stuff overseas. So there's just so many different, she's in a really good position to essentially write her own destiny right now. So I for me, it's almost like believe it when I see it, just because of how, with so much integrity, both women have operated in the last 2 years.
Oh, very much so. And, one thing that is consistent with professional wrestling, you never really know what's going to happen until it happens, because as much as we like to cover it like a regular sport, well, there's not weekly press conferences. There's not locker room interviews. And if you do a locker room interview, you don't really know for sure how much is in character, how much is out of character. And which is good, because that creates shows like this where we can speculate on the storylines, we can talk about the person, and you do get a little bit of a different aspect than you do with regular sports media. Just kind of winding it down here, one wrestler who did leave WWE went to AEW and has reinvented herself a couple of times. Right now is stuck back in the 1920s, the women's champion, Timeless Toni Storm. How do you feel about the silent movie starlet champion?
I mean, I love it. I was at the press conference, or as the media scrum in LA, where she kind of left the letter, and staying in character. I think it's different. I mean, the good thing about wrestling is, and I think MJF said this at Wrestle Dream. The good thing about wrestling, there's something for everybody. You know, if you want more of the, characters and stuff that's not necessarily of reality, you have places like WoW. You have somebody like Tony Storm. If you want something where it's just like, screw the storylines, I just want to see good wrestling, you have that too. If you want a long storyline where now you can sit down with your friend who has no idea what's going on with the Rock and the Samoan dynasty, you can now go back and tell a whole long form story.
Sure.
If you want comedy, you have somebody like Art. Like, there's just so many different variations for everybody. It's a great place to be in. And again, for the people who complain like, oh, I don't like this thing, it's like, well, don't concentrate on the thing you don't like. Appreciate and support the stuff that you do like.
Absolutely. Focus on what's positive. As we're winding it down here, got the championship round, just 4 quick questions. Who's your breakout star? Who are you predicting as your breakout star on the men's side of pro wrestling in 2024?
Ooh. Oh, a breakout star. That's a hard one because there's so many men that are coming out. And then there's so many people like, Jinder Mahal, who like it's coming back. And then would The Rock be a breakout star if he
and just somebody that's going to raise it to the next level?
It was what I really did like when I did the media scrum for AEW was Ricky Starks. I really liked, he did a real great blend, like you were talking about, as far as real versus character. And I feel like more people have to put respect on his name. There's a lot more things that he can do. There's a lot of things that he has been doing. He just really needs that like perfect storyline for people, even though you might not like the wrestler, it's like you see that storyline, you have to acknowledge them. So I think Ricky Starks might be the person as far as breakout, even though he's already broken out. That makes sense.
I like absolute Ricky Starks. That's a good one. He stood out in that initial relaunch of the NWA too. And then cashing in on that opportunity for the TNT title against Cody.
Yeah. Great pick. And then also to Swerve, if they get him, I mean, I don't know. It was kind of like he had this high going into like November, and then I don't necessarily know what's happening. So again, it's kind of like just great athletics, which most of the wrestlers do have, and then great storyline. It's kind of that lightning in the bottle type thing. I think Swerve has that too.
I think Swerve was my pick when we did our preview show on Wrestling Spotlight, and I think you have to give a little bit of the credit to Prince Nana too.
Yes, very true.
He's getting the Swerve While I Drive dance over, so you got to give Prince Nana some credit.
Yeah, that's going to be, I feel like it's going to be in rap songs within the year, eventually.
How about on the women's side?
Oh, I mean, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Jade Cargill, as far as, when they're going to bring her out. If it's going to be a Royal Rumble thing, if it's going to be during WrestleMania, it's going to be after WrestleMania, if it's going to be SummerSlam. I personally feel like the anticipation, SummerSlam might be really the ideal spot, because like you want what you want, but it's like I feel like there's other storylines that are in play, and slipping her into the SummerSlam might really kind of rev her up for the next WrestleMania, opposed to having her debut in Royal Rumble and then what will we do with her WrestleMania type thing. So that would be Jade would be, I guess, like the breakout. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Athena in 2020, because she had such a great 2023.
Yeah.
I mean, oh gosh, NWA. I always mess up their names.
Pretty Empowered, the Page sisters.
King Bees. Bees. They're not signed with it. Yeah, they're not signed with NWA, but I interviewed Charity King, and it was one of those things where I feel, and this is kind of the difference in women's wrestling now, a lot of the women that are coming up, it's like you can't even, it's no longer women who wrestle, it's wrestlers. I was watching a match with Charity King, and it's just kind of like you forget that she's a woman. It's just two people who are wrestling, and it's really great wrestling. So I feel like they're popping up a lot too. There's like a tag team component. They're within the year, something's gonna pop with them. I think
That
something's
is a
gonna be
good
really
one.
great with them. Yeah.
Here, and I'll give a deep dive into West Coast indie wrestling, the Vanity Twins.
Oh yes,
I
yeah.
think they're gonna make a stage, be it in Ultimate Women of Wrestling or in some of the West Coast super indies. I think they're somebody that could really break out.
Yeah,
Very
and then
entertaining.
I mean, we're talking twins, the Renegade twins as
Yeah,
well.
the
We've
Renegade.
been seeing them all over the place. It's only a matter of it's just where they stick, and then the storyline, and then for people already are aware of them. It's just for a lot more people to kind of grab hold.
Very good. And finally, we'll stick with the women's wrestling. How about the Virtuosa?
Oh my gosh, well deserved. I mean, coming from WWE and doing an amazing thing at Impact Wrestling, she had such a great run, and redefining herself time and time again. And then the great thing about the TNA and the TNA Impact brand is it never feels like it's kind of, I think it's that show Cheers or something, where like everybody knows your name and you can always come back. It never feels like, this person, it feels like this person is graduated or wants to try something new, and that's okay with Impact or TNA, and they can always come back. And I think Deonna was at this point where she's kind of done so many different things, and now like she's built this name for herself, right? Bigger and better than where she was at WWE. And why not? She's been to WWE. She might go back again. Who knows? But
Sure.
why not test her abilities at AEW? And like you were showing, as far as the women's roster, I think she would be a great addition to it. And I'm curious, in particular, like her. I know they're kind of building a storyline already, but eventually storylines of her and Britt Baker. Like I'm curious as far as, because Britt had a dominance, and then last year we didn't see her as much. So adding new where is it, like blood to the water? I don't know what that term is, but adding new people to the roster. I feel like Deonna can mix it up with pretty much anybody, and it'll be a great story.
Absolutely. Now, just the last thing, TK, where can people find you? And of course, thanks for coming on the Wrestling Spotlight. Really appreciated having you on.
Yeah, not a problem. As far as wrestling wise, you can find me on Women's Wrestling Talk. So it's WWE Talk Pod, and the website's www.talkpod.com. As far as personal, I don't really do too much stuff on my personal page, more entertainment stuff. And I do more producing. My shoot job is producing. So I do way more behind the scenes stuff. But if you want to check out those, sometimes I dabble some pictures at TK Trinidad and on all things everywhere.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks a lot, and I'm sure we'll reach out to you again here on Wrestling Spotlight, Wrestling with Sales. Really appreciate you coming on to kick off the 24th season.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.